Hey, this is Hugh Forrest, and I am the Chief Programming Officer at South by Southwest. I'm excited and I am incredibly honored to welcome you to the final edition of the first round of South by Southwest sessions online. We've had some amazing content here over the last 2 months. If you have missed any of this content, you can catch it all on the South by Southwest YouTube channel, so please spend some quality time there. For this afternoon, we have a discussion that is completely timely and completely relevant to where the world is in June 2020. Speaking today is Deniese Davis, who has produced countless projects, including music videos, short films, and digital content. She is probably best known for producing Issa Rae's award-winning web series, The Misadventures of an Awkward Black Girl. She now serves as Chief Operating Officer of ColorCreative, an exclusive company for diverse and emerging writers that she and Issa co-founded in 2013. Deniese will be joined by Donald Albright, an entrepreneur and co-founder of Tenderfoot TV. Originally from California, he has spent the last 20 years working in Atlanta's music industry with a focus on marketing, management, and A&R. In 2016, he partnered with Payne Lindsay to launch Tenderfoot TV and has since helped to shape the company's business model and its growth strategy. Donald and Deniese will discuss how media and entertainment can bring light to social injustices, giving voices to those who have been ignored for far too long, and inciting real change. The conversation will be moderated by Tanja Renee Sidham of The Root. Donald and Deniese and Tanja, we're looking for some powerful insights from you three today on this very, very timely topic. Please take it away.
Hi, everyone. I am Tanja Renee Stidham, the entertainment writer at TheRoot.com, and I am joined by Donald Albright, president and co-founder of Tenderfoot TV, and Deniese Davis, COO of ColorCreative. So actually, I want to start off by introducing our guests and letting them talk a little bit about themselves. So Deniese, why don't we start with you?
Oh, okay, great. Hi, everyone. Thank you for being here today. So my name is Deniese Davis. I'm first and foremost a producer in the film and television space, but also run a company called ColorCreative that I co-founded with Issa Rae that focuses on providing access and opportunities and pipeline building for emerging filmmakers and writers of color and trying to support their work. So that is me.
And what about you, Donald?
Hey everyone, I'm Donald Albright, president, co-founder of Tenderfoot TV. Tenderfoot is a podcast production company, media company, and we started in 2016 with one true crime podcast, and we have been making true crime and other podcasts for about the past 3.5, 4 years. My background started in the music industry and kind of evolved over the past 20 years and kind of landed me in a new medium. And it's an exciting medium where we get to tell stories really unfiltered, and that's what we like to do at Tenderfoot.
Amazing. So as you can see, we have some amazing guests. Now today, what we're going to do is we're going to be discussing how media and entertainment, how we can channel and advocate for shedding light on social justices, such as in avenues such as podcasts and television, and give voices to those who have been ignored and enact change as well. So can each of you talk about how do you approach the work that you do? Let's go with you, Deniese.
Yeah, so a lot of the work I do is at the intersection of helping creators tell their stories, right? And so what we look at is first and foremost coming from the digital space, where initially my career started in a place where we were able to independently tell our stories, and as my career's evolved and I've got into the industry, so to speak, it's really looking at how do I amplify other voices and storytellers who traditionally are kept outside these barriers of entry and aren't able to have the access to the same resources, funding, and distribution models in order to amplify the stories in our communities. And so with that in mind, we look to develop and produce stories that kind of come from any underserved community, and primarily and specifically looking at creators who are looking to tell stories and have very specific and unique voices, and using our platform as a way to collaborate and support, and again, help our power build them into opportunities that will allow them to exist on their own. So, that can mean in the television space where we are developing and taking projects into the mainstream media and trying to get them set up. That can mean doing the same thing with film, and then primarily also with our digital channel. We have a YouTube channel that has existed for years. It's where we started from, and we have kind of kept it active by releasing and supporting other creators' work there while also developing original content. And so really looking at all of the platforms at our disposal and working really hard to continue to tell other people's stories.
Absolutely, always important. What about you, Donald? You have a lot of things going on as well.
Yeah, I mean, we started in the podcast space and have now gotten into the TV space. It's funny because the company's called Tenderfoot TV. We started, it was basically aspirational thinking. We wanted to make a true crime documentary. And with no resources, we were really forced to make a podcast and didn't really plan on starting a podcast company. Up and Vanish was that first podcast. And because of the massive success, it really just provided opportunity for us to continue to make more content and tell more stories in the true crime space. And we really didn't have an understanding of what this medium was, what the power of it could be. And once we got a taste of it, I realized that we now have a platform. We now have really a responsibility to tell stories, not just stories that are compelling because the mystery itself is compelling, but like, what are the stories that mean something to me? And really that's where we really started to lean into, like, what are you passionate about, and what stories are going to actually elevate the conversation around victims, because we do true crime, right? So around victims that are in communities that are underserved. And that's really kind of what rolled us into doing more content like Atlanta Monster, which was geared towards a Black audience, with had all Black victims, and it was a story that had been told, but not in a way that we felt it should have been told. So we kind of stumbled into the position that we're in, and we're all still figuring out how to use this platform to really not just elevate story itself, but important stories, and stories for people that really don't have the advantage of having the major backing from a studio, or don't get that call back. So just providing opportunity and elevating voices in our community is the path that we're on, and we started that journey a couple of years ago.
Absolutely, very important. And speaking of true crime, fans of Insecure may be familiar with the show within the show, Looking for Latoya, and it has now since delved into the podcast world, because true crime podcasts are very popular right now. And that's to bring attention to the lack of true crime shows that are centered around missing Black women specifically, and the importance of that and telling those stories in mainstream media. So how did that collaboration come about?
Yeah, well, it started with the Insecure rollout, and seeing that our fans and our audience was really catching on to our show within a show, which has always been popular with every season. We obviously change the story every season, and in this particular case, the reason why we did Looking for Latoya is exactly as you said. There was a conversation in the writers' room, and the conversation around true crime podcasts that we all are a fan of, and how we felt like this space is missing and not really talked about when it comes to missing Black women and missing Black people in general. And so to kind of build a satire and to spark a conversation around it, it naturally became Looking for Latoya. And again, based on the responses and people who were watching our daily shows and wanting to actually have more insight into our Latoya characters, we thought, why not come up with this brilliant idea to find a way to extend the brand. Also, we came up with this halfway through the season while it was released. So it wasn't like this was something we thought of and were geniuses about early on. It really was based on the response of Insecure. And so within that, I'd known Donald, we had connected, I think, only earlier this year, and knowing Tenderfoot's presence not only in true crime but also their infrastructure, we knew we wanted to align with strategic partners who could really kind of step in and help us do this in such a short amount of time that we had. And so what we did is took the stems from the show within the show itself and things that we had already shot, and said, let's build a complete story around it, so that way we could satisfy fans and also continue the conversation on another platform. And shout out to Donald and his team, because again, it was a phone call that was like, hey, we want to put this podcast episode out in, what was it, 4 weeks, 5 weeks? Is that possible? And from there, we actually started from scratch. We actually wrote the whole episode while combining some of the pieces we already had. So it was a big labor of love project, but really, really happy with how it turned out, and also just really happy with the responses and people, wanting to go and get more information about these characters in the story, and also what happened to Latoya.
Exactly, because we were all wondering that. So it's a sense of edutainment, as you can see. And also, too, there was a bit of philanthropy there as well, because we actually hit the exclusive on theroot.com that Issa Rae's label, Radio, Tenderfoot TV, and HBO donated $30,000 to the Black and Missing Foundation. So that was very, very important. And in what ways can you talk about how you collaborated with Black and Missing Foundation?
Yeah, well,
that came from you guys. I think that came from you all first.
Yeah, well, it was one of those serendipitous things where, again, because of the show within the show, and people already being familiar with looking for Latoya's, satire-ness, the Black and Missing Foundation actually reached out to us and Issa, inquiring about ways we can work together. And at the same time, what they didn't know is we were putting together this podcast. And so we saw it as a divine opportunity to figure out how to amplify their brand and their work, because, for us, yes, we want to entertain, and we definitely want to pull in a conversation around these themes, but more importantly, why not be able to shine a light on an organization that currently exists, that is doing the actual work and really trying to lend support to, again, their company. And as much as we're pulling a satire and entertaining, we also still want people to take home the message and the realness of the realities of our world, that this is actually a real problem and an issue that we face. And yes, we're making fun of it, but more importantly, this actually needs to be talked about and amplified. And so to partner with their organization and more importantly, just support them, we felt it was the right thing to do. And also, I think especially given the current climate of our world, it was one of those things, like, you start to notice that entertainment, in terms of some of the topics and things you talk about, sometimes have that social impact angle. And when it does, there needs to be another extension and a way to really shine a light on organizations and people who are doing the real work. So that way, people who feel like they want to get involved or want to learn more about it, there is a place for them to go to. And so that's really what the Black and Missing Foundation was able to provide, and why we all felt such a big need to want to support. So yeah, Donna, I don't know if you want to add to anything.
Yeah,
but
I think just overall, the project itself, just as a huge fan of Insecure, and it's so much important work sometimes isn't recognized because you're also laughing while you're learning. And I think Insecure has been just great in addressing issues in the Black community with on a broader scale. This season is a perfect example when it comes to whether it be postpartum, whether it comes to treatment of Black women in terms of mental health and just in the healthcare system in general. And then obviously looking for Latoya, very funny, actors did a great job, but it underscores an actual real problem that a lot of people don't really know exists. And there have been some spots where a light will be shined on a case here or there on a podcast or on a documentary, but it still doesn't compare to what we call like missing white woman syndrome, which is when a white woman goes missing, then all eyes are on that case. And not every case, but there are certain things that jump out that you're almost guaranteed local, regional, national support. And there's a big gap in between how our stories are covered versus how their stories are covered. So if we're not doing it ourselves, if we're not bringing awareness to it ourselves, then we really can't blame them. We have to do it, and then we have to force their attention. And I think that's why this is so important, because if it were a startup production company and a startup podcast company, this thing wouldn't have gotten national attention. It wouldn't have received coverage on through all the major press outlets, right? So the fact that it's Issa Rae Productions, it's Tenderfoot TV, we're able to shine a light, and people who are like, oh, I didn't realize this wasn't even an issue. So that's really how we try to use our platform, is if we can take a story that may get 50,000 ears on it and elevate that to 1 million ears, then that's our goal. whether we produce it, whether we find it, if we can find a way to work with these people and tell their stories and these creators and elevate their voices, then that's really the goal. And I think Looking for Latoya was a great example of how a scripted project can be funny and meaningful and get good press and actually donate to an organization that's actually doing the work. You know what I'm saying? We worked hard for 5 weeks. They've been at this for 10 years, you know? So we need to always look to the people who are actually on the front lines doing the work. And, you know, I try to be good at playing my role and, you know, playing my position. And my position, if I can be best at just pointing someone in the right direction and saying, hey, look here if you want advice, look here if you want to donate, versus saying, come to me, then that's what we always, you know, try to do.
Absolutely. And you have been actually, Donald, I'm glad you talk about elevating marginalized voices because you have been channeling that activism through your work and through your art. So with Atlanta Monsters, which is Tenderfoot's podcast, it investigates the Atlanta child murders, which is something that a lot of people don't know about. So can you walk us actually through that process in creating that platform so that more people can know about that case?
Yeah, I think it all started with one project, and Up and Vanished, which, you know, it covered a South Georgia teacher who was a former beauty queen, and a high school teacher. It was, you know, a case that already had national attention but was unsolved. And I saw the amount of attention and the amount of people that cared about this one missing woman, and we should care, right? And then when I asked Payne, my business partner, he's white, he's 10 years younger than me, so there's a generational gap there, and obviously a cultural gap. And I asked him, just texted him randomly one day and said, hey, have you ever heard of the Atlanta child murders? He's from Atlanta, or, you know, Kennesaw, so a little bit north of Atlanta. And he said no, he had never heard of Wayne Williams, never heard of the Atlanta child murders. And I was like, damn, this is crazy. I've heard about this my entire life. And I wasn't even, let's see, I was 5 years old. No, just barely being born, I want to say, when this was happening. I was like 2 years old when Wayne Williams was arrested, right? So for me, it's just been something that was taught to me. I was heard about Wayne Williams, Atlanta child murder, just my entire life, as if I was in fear, even though he was in jail already. So for Payne to be from Atlanta and not know about it, I was just like, man, how many other people don't know about this story that to me is so personal? And so we just decided then, I sent him a couple links. He read the Wikipedia page and was like, this is insane. Like, how do I not know about this? And he talked to his dad about it. And his dad was at Georgia Tech at the time. And he said, yeah, I didn't even have a TV, but I remember hearing about it just when I was in the coffee shop, you know, seeing it on the news. And it just showed us that there's a real generational gap and cultural gap in terms of about the story that we care about, right? Like, why does everyone know about the Zodiac killer, but not many people know about Wayne Williams? And that's a reflection of who the victims. It's less sensationalized, right? Like, that's what gets headlines in terms of crime. It's really about how much do we care about the victims, and we seem to care more about one white female victim than we do about 29 Black victims, mostly kids. You know, and it just was. We were all as a company just like floored, and then I then started talking to people who actually from the South and were around my age range, and some of them didn't even know about it. And we just said, look, we have to tell this story. We're going to tell it from a perspective, the organic perspective of how it actually happened. Me telling Payne about it, him not knowing anything about it and wanting to tell the story. And we kind of told it from this middle gray area because, you know, race is polarizing, right? And we didn't want to turn off anyone to say, oh, I don't want to hear about that. You're playing the race card. Or we didn't want to make it so it's not an innocence project, you know what I mean? And it's not a project that we're going to you know, divide people on race. We want everyone to take a look from the sidelines, look at the facts, and then weigh in and say, and then ask yourselves questions, ask your parents questions. Why don't I know about this? Why didn't you guys ever tell me about this? So that's really how it started. And we were fortunate enough to partner with House of Works and iHeart to produce the series. And I mean, it was great. I mean, it has over, I think, 60 million total listens, you know, since launching in 2018. And, you know, we really took the approach of the audience we were going for wasn't necessarily your average podcast listening audience. There wasn't a lot of narrative storytelling for Black listeners, you know, at that time. There was maybe a couple of true crime ones here and there, episodes here and there, but we were really going after a group of people who weren't the target podcast listening audience. They were probably older than your average podcast listener. So we really reached out to the Black community in Atlanta. You know, we put up billboards with Wayne Williams' mugshot. We knew that when people in Atlanta saw that, it would be instantly reminded about this tragedy that happened nearly 40 years ago. And they would be intrigued and say, what is that? I need to watch that, listen to that. You know, what is a podcast? If they didn't know what a podcast was, we wanted them to find out about it and then go download it and listen. And a conversation, you know, between friends, coworkers, family, and that was really the goal: get people talking and create that awareness.
Absolutely. And of course, a pivotal key step in making sure our voices are raised and elevated is actually making sure we create opportunities for those marginalized voices as well, who are creators. So for Deniese, you're doing that as the COO of Color Creative. How are you creating those opportunities for women and minority writers?
Yeah, well, it's, you know, it's a multitude of ways where what we found, and again, I think this is just coming from starting our careers in digital with myself and Issa, is that, you know, we're living in an age, and even speaking, you know, to Tenderfoot's getting their way of that they got started. It's like we're living in an age where we have so many resources at our disposal to be able to create content and to be able to create stories, where you sometimes don't always need, you know, the backing of these big corporations, the backing of big Hollywood. It's like you can take so much ownership in creating your own path and your own brand. And so what we found is, how do we not only create pipelines for people who do want to go on into the more Hollywood mainstream space, but more importantly, just need a little bit more resources and education and tools in order to be able to create their own content in their own homes, right? And I think what we saw is there's that disconnect where, similar to what Donald said, it's like our communities aren't necessarily the ones who are able to get that funding and again, be able to lynch into these larger pipelines or these larger platforms, and are continually overlooked. And so what we empower creators to do with, you know, various video platforms at our disposal, especially with social media, is to find a way to create the content for yourselves, and knowing that your audience will find itself, right? And amplifying that way. And so what we do is build pipelines, again, that go for writers and filmmakers who want to go off and create bigger television and film shows, because the budget's there. You do kind of need that support and that distribution model. But then on the other side, there's so many creators who quite honestly just want to create their content without those restrictions. And they can do it, but they don't know where to start. They don't know what access points exist. They don't know what type of crew they need, how, if I go and am able to secure funding or raise money on Kickstarter, what then do I do with that money? How do I budget accordingly? And so what we really try to do is, again, just provide that opportunity to give as much information as we have, whatever that may look like. And so, for example, in 2013, like a year prior, before we fully established Color Creative, Issa and myself and our team did our first new media workshop that we did completely independent and completely kind of self-funded. And the whole idea coming at the time in the web series space was to design a workshop that we could just give our informational knowledge in the direct room to these creators, and really pinpoint and target their projects and let them know this is what you need. Because again, it's all about sharing information. And now these times it's like, in another world, it's like you don't need Tenderfoot to create your podcast. You could literally go and create your podcast, right? If you have a story to tell, then tell it. You don't necessarily need us to do it. And I think sometimes that's the misconception, that you need someone with the name, you need a big brand, but what you really just need is a compelling story. So a lot of the work we do with Color Creative is looking at all of these arenas and saying, how do we just be a brand that helps kind of amplify and push these creators forward and provide them with the things that they don't have. And then more importantly, encourage and empower them to work with each other. And I think, again, there's that idea that you need to go out and get an Issa Rae, or you need to get a Lena Waithe, or you need to get Ava DuVernay. And yes, their stamp of approvals or their support matters. But what matters even more than that is that you're looking to the side of you and looking at the other people who are also creating content, who believe in the same vision that you do, where you could actually partner and create together. And one day you might become a household name, but it's the people who are doing the work. It is the people who are afraid to tell the stories that they feel need to be told. And by way of that, I believe that, anything is possible. So, Color Creative is changing, it's evolving. We have a new business model that we are implementing throughout this year that I can't really talk too much about, but, we're super excited because a lot of it has to deal with, taking our brand one step further and not just only supporting people at the ground level, but actually supporting and extending our support throughout the rest of their careers and investing in their careers in a real way. So, and I think that, again, is just such a big gap in the media space from all walks of life, no matter what media placement you're in, whether it's journalism, whether it's podcasts, whether it's, digital content, film, television, all of these arenas have systemically shut us out. And so, how do we kind of close that gap and say we need to be finding ways to support these storytellers in every single arena? Otherwise, our stories will never get told.
Absolutely.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
Yes.
I was going to add to that.
Go ahead, yeah.
So I think that's what's great about the podcast medium is that it's much harder to shut someone out in this medium. You can literally, you don't need to buy cameras to make a show. You don't have to talk to a network about getting airtime. Even music, right? You can be an independent musician, but if you want the major label support, it's still difficult because, like, what is that A&R and executive going to say? Who are they signing? Are they following trends? You can literally just go create, find your audience. There's nothing in between you and your listener as a podcaster, right? Obviously, there's corporate companies that are now investing heavily into podcasting, but as a new podcaster, as someone who has a compelling story, if you're good at what you want to do, and you can make an audio documentary, or you can make a chat style show that's compelling with good personalities, you can win, and no one can tell you what you can and cannot say. And that's the beauty of this medium, and why, like, look, we got into this to try to get to TV. We ended up getting to TV, right, and making a TV show. And the first thing I said was, and this is what I thought it was going to be, like, with all the freedom that I'm now accustomed to through podcasting, I have someone looking over my shoulder and telling me what I can and can't do to tell the same exact story, just in a different medium. So that's why I think, especially in this time where, a time of COVID and a time of social unrest, where everyone has something to express and has extra time on their hands, podcasting is a medium that everyone can try, that has an idea and wants to demo a show or put out an episode, see how it does. It's just that, it's just that easy to get involved. And I think it's really where TV and film, like, where people are looking, they're looking for IP in this medium now, the way they were looking to books and, optioning, stories and articles. So yeah, it's a great time to be a podcaster right now.
It is indeed. And since you brought that up about how we're living in a pandemic and social unrest, a lot of people are wondering, how do I make an impact, right? What do I do, whether it's on the ground protesting or creating art that makes an impact and showcases knowledge and, embraces, marginalized voices in this way. So as both of you as creators, and I will actually direct this to you, Denise, did you realize that the impact of Insecure would have that much impact on the world when the show began? Because as we mentioned earlier, it's 4 seasons in, we're very popular. So what do you hope viewers take away from the show?
Yeah, well, it's a great question, and I will never forget, because I'm one of the few people who have been a part of the show since the pilot, right? And so I will never forget all of us making this pilot and kind of our first foray into television, which was Melina Matsoukas' first TV directorial debut, Issa's first television show, my first television show, and actually Prentice Penny, our showrunner, it was his first time showrunning. He had been in several writers' rooms before, but he never ran a room. And so, it was all of our first. And I think we went in sort of naive, but also very confident with this idea that, like, no matter how the way that things are traditionally made, we were still going to make our show the way we wanted to. And thankfully, with HBO support, they allowed us to do that. But I distinctly remember seeing the very first cut of the pilot, and Melina showed it to me to be like, what do you think? And this is before HBO even saw it. And I remember getting so emotional, and it didn't like strike me until the very end when I saw the credits roll. And I realized, I was like, God, like, I'm so moved. And like, our show's a comedy. It's not supposed to make me like emotional, but what struck me the most was the realization in that moment that I had never before seen a television show like this. Like, I was like, this is bizarre, the fact that we were able to make this, but like, this whole time, I don't think I even realized the importance of what we were creating until I saw the end result. And that was because, we all grew up in media, and you grow up watching television, grow up watching films, and there's so many films you can point to. But in the television space, I was like, I can't believe I've never seen two Black women just be. And I knew, and I remember telling Melina that I really, really hope if HBO did this right and put it out right, that it would find its audience, but more importantly, be seen as something that was like revolutionary and groundbreaking just for the fact that it existed. And so I think, season one, it was critical acclaim. We definitely jumped out the gate with a big fan base. But then since then, in the last four seasons, it is exponentially grown. It is kind of taken off from almost sometimes in a word of mouth kind of way, where with every season and with every level of storytelling that we do, people are always like, oh, have you seen this show? And then what we found too is that we're cutting through where, yes, our show, there's a big African-American community that shows up and watches our show, and a lot of marginalized voices who support, because they're like, we still aren't seeing other shows like this outside of Atlanta. Like, that's the only other companion show you can compare us to. But then on the other side, we're finding a really large white audience as well, who are taken to the show because they realize it's relatable no matter what these characters are. But then also they're kind of learning, a little bit about our community in a way that isn't on the nose and isn't like forced, right? It's not us saying like, we're going to tell you what it's like to be a Black woman. We're like, no, you're going to follow this Black woman amongst her lives. And hopefully through it, you understand and realize that we're all just humans too. We all go through the same things in life. It just might be different in our perspective, in our community, than it is in yours. And so that, I think, alone has been something that I've been very proud of. And then even with this last season, I mean, obviously when we were making it in the fall and winter of last year, like, who would have ever saw or seen, this pandemic upon us, to know that we would be premiering at a time when even more and more people are at home and need, they were looking for that little light in the week of something that they could like latch onto. And I have no doubt that our base has only grown even more so. But then, add that to the movement that grew in the last couple of weeks, and the timing of that just completely took us all by surprise, right? And it's one of those serendipitous things that like we just are grateful for, but also to be proud that we still continue to exist. We didn't have to make it to 4 seasons. We could have been cut a long time ago, but the fact that we are here and we're here at the forefront of this movement, I think will really speak volumes, honestly, for decades to come, in a way that I personally hope that we're not the only ones, right? I'm still waiting to see another half-hour show with Black leads outside of us in Atlanta, and we don't have that yet. And so we shouldn't be the only ones. And also, we're not a show that tries to be everything Black. We are, specifically telling the story of these 2 women, but we're also not trying to tell the stories of all Black people. There's tons of stories out there, and they all deserve to receive the same type of platform and the same type of audience. So for all of those things, it's just, we're so grateful. It's such an exciting time. And, it also makes the stakes a little bit more higher for season 5, where you're just like, oh, okay, like we gotta step our game up. We can't just fail it now.
Right.
But I'm excited, and I really hope that, if nothing else, it inspires a change in the way that, again, we tell marginalized stories, period. And realizing that you could be successful, you could be, you could have a level of premium storytelling. It doesn't have to be a sitcom. It doesn't have to be, heavy-handed and designed to try to tell everybody's story. It's like you can be as specific and niche as possible in your storytelling, yet still find a very wide, broad, and universal audience. So.
Absolutely. And I love how you pinpoint that where you got really emotional because you saw these 2 Black women front and center, right? Because our stories matter. We matter. Black lives matter. And so I want to pivot to you, Donald, about a recent podcast that Tenderfoot has released called Somebody, because she's somebody that matters. And it's about a Black mother in Chicago, and that's from my hometown of Chicago, and how she fights for justice in her son's death. So how do we and how have you amplified more of those voices and stories like this and continue to do that?
Yeah, I think, this is a story that came to me, and I really wanted it. And I actually wasn't able to get it at first. And it went, and they ended up doing a deal with iHeart. And I just said, you know what, I need to call iHeart and I need to back into this because I need to help amplify this any way that I possibly can. I mean, it was done by the Invisible Institute Chicago, Topic Studios, and they produced it and made a great project. So, and they just brought a completed project. And I just said, look, this is a Black mother fighting for justice for her 21-year-old son who was gunned down in Chicago. This can't cross my desk, and I can't allow this to go somewhere else. And when it ended up landing at iHeart, which I have a great relationship with them, I reached out to them as well as to Topic and said, look, I still want to be a part of this. How can I use this Tenderfoot platform of our millions of, tens of millions of monthly listeners to just amplify this story? So total credit to them for making it, to Chappelle for being so courageous and telling her son's story. And really, I mean, the level that she had to go like take it to fight for her son and really start her own investigation for over years, even before the involvement of the Invisible Institute. She just did such a great job, and how hard that must have been. So I just had to be a part of making this as big as it could possibly be. So we're always looking for those stories, and whether we're creating them internally or someone's bringing them to us, it's just really about finding them and finding the stories. It's difficult in a way because we're not, Looking for Latoya was the first thing we ever did that was fully scripted, right? When we can let our imagination run wild, we can tell any story that we want to tell. That story can have the perfect ending. We don't get that opportunity when you're doing unscripted, right? So we have to find the stories that are compelling, that are important, that we have access to. So while there may be, and I get emails all the time about every story you can imagine that impacts us in our community, why don't you do a podcast on this? Or are you researching that? We do research a lot of those. We do go down the road a couple layers deep in development or research, and we try to find out what is there. Because in order to tell a story like Atlanta Monster, in order to tell a story like Somebody, look at the amount of access that you actually have to have in order to hold people's attention. And that's really what it's about. We have to tell stories that are, it sounds weird saying it, but they have to be entertaining enough to actually get the listenership, so that then when you're consuming that content, you love it so much that you're telling people about it. You're listening, the numbers are high. When those numbers are high, then other people are covering it. And next thing you know, this story is on, GMA or, 2020 or Dateline, right? And that's the goal. So it's a lot harder to, tell those stories because you have to have the access. And it's also difficult, which goes back to the Black and Missing Foundation, is that when we're looking for Black stories to tell from a missing person standpoint, a simple Google search, you're not going to find as many, right? Because they're not being covered by the media. So when you're searching, the results that you're getting are only the people who decided to talk about this case. So, and then when you find a website like Black and Missing Foundation, and you can look through some of those cases, you then have to find the case that checks the boxes of like, how can I get X amount of episodes or compelling episodes about this? So we're developing projects now that are less time intensive and can be told in like an hour versus like 12 hours, right? So that gives a lot more freedom and leeway to say, look, this story may only be 45 minutes long, but we're going to get to tell it. So we have projects in development there. We have a project called Sworn that really peels back the layers of the criminal justice system. And we're about to release season 2. We cover a couple of cases, including Calvin Johnson, who was convicted of rape and sentenced to life, who was recently exonerated by the Georgia Innocence Project. So we try to just be very balanced in how we approach things, right? And we don't want to do an entire season on the criminal justice system and not talk about the obvious, right? And this is all stuff that's been produced even before the, Ahmaud Arbery and George Floyd and Breonna Taylor. It just happens to be, unfortunately, the timing is going to always be right to tell these stories. You can work on something right now, and in 9 months, the timing will be right because it's systemic. It's going to keep happening until there's real significant change. And that's unfortunate, but we have to be on the forefront of really seeking out those stories and seeking out those storytellers. Because another thing that is important is not just telling Black stories and elevating, for example, Chappelle Wells and her journey with on Somebody, but like, who's producing that? who's writing that? Who are the behind the scenes people? And what is their complexion, right? Like we have to fill these rooms with, like, I think Denise and Issa are very, very intentional with Color Creative. They said, this is a problem and this is how we solve it, right? We started out very unintentional, saying, let's make a true crime documentary. And then next thing you know, we're making a true crime podcast. And then we're saying, wow, we have a platform and power where we need to start thinking about how we use this. So it's an ongoing process. And as a small company, just getting into just bringing on so many more projects that are fitting, this narrative of true crime, of even diving all the way back to the civil rights and the Tulsa race riots. And there's so many things that we're exploring right now that I'm excited to talk about. And we have, we'll be announcing some of that stuff soon. So we're trying to be very intentional moving forward about what we're doing.
That's very exciting. So at the root, I try to amplify voices, use my platform to do so, and you two have done so as well. And you're inspirational to me. I'm sure you're inspirational to everyone watching. So I want you to tell the people who are listening, how do the Black creators and creators of color break through in Hollywood to make an impact such as yourself?
That is the $1 million question.
It is.
Yeah, Tanja. Well, what I see is what at the root of every issue that exists within Hollywood is two things, right? And on one hand, it is trying to convince the gatekeepers, who are predominantly white and also predominantly male, that our stories matter, but more importantly, that there's an audience for our stories. And sometimes the only way to break through that barrier and to get them to see our POV is to figure out a way to break down and tell your story through a lens that feels palatable to a wider audience, because otherwise they will see your story as niche, and they will pigeonhole you, and they won't put the marketing dollars behind it. They won't, amplify it through all of the distribution platforms possible, and really put their support behind it in the same way that they would support white content. And so, when approaching Hollywood, the best ways that people have found a way to break through when they're not doing stories about slavery are the stories where you can position it so that they understand that, yes, this is tapping into this audience and this community, but also here is how a wider audience will also be a part of this, and will also find this, informative, relative, entertaining, because at the end of the day, the gatekeepers who control that control the narrative. They control what is being seen and the output. And so, they will dictate who and where and when and how, but, we have to have a hand in helping guide that, so that way it's not misinformed, it's not stunted in terms of its release. So that is one way to approach the barriers in Hollywood, and in terms of the stories you try to bring to them, is that you sort of have to do the work and showcasing and getting them to believe in just who and what your audience is for this. So that's one thing. And then the other hand is also just kind of the other way around. Is I personally think one of the best ways to break in Hollywood, outside of being a creator, is to go work in Hollywood and try to get up the ranks to become one of the people who have the power to greenlight and have authority, because that is a very, very rooted systemic problem. There is not a lot of high-level Black executives at a lot of these networks and studios, and they are the ones who hold the purse strings. They are the ones who ultimately make those decisions. And so with me as a Black creator, when I'm in the room when I'm in a room with all these white execs trying to convince them to tell the story, there is usually a disconnect into why this story is important and why it matters. And if you just had one person in the room who looked like us, who could champion and who could push that, up the hill where there are no questions asked, then, that support matters too, because why should it be up to us to then just give up our stories and give it over to, quite honestly, a bunch of white executives who ultimately may not know what to do with it. So, the other thing I want to say about breaking barriers is that it's like, we need more people who are interested in working in these mediums from that level, from the other side, from a buyer side, who can only push to really create a space for us to be able to tell these. And, until that happens, I think we'll always continue to be hitting the same wall, and we'll not be able to kind of really create the change that we all want to see, because that's really, where it all starts.
It absolutely does. So we actually have about 15 minutes and we're going to go to the Q&A. I already see, as you said, as I said, you guys have been inspiring me and you're inspiring the attendees as well. So we got a lot of questions actually. So I'm going to start with Natasha Rogers. She asks, how can viewers encourage the mainstream media to understand that they have a moral responsibility to address and show social injustices in their stories? Take that away, Donald.
Yeah, wait, repeat that one again. I'm sorry.
Sure. So, how can viewers encourage the mainstream media to understand that they have a moral responsibility to address these social injustices in their stories?
Yeah, I think the money is what motivates
Money talks.
networks. Ratings represents money to them. We have support. I I always laugh. My wife supports every single show on TV that is by Black people. I don't care if I'm looking at like, man, this show looks absolutely terrible. But guess what? She gonna give it a shot, or she gonna put the TV on while it's while it's playing. We have to understand that like our dollars matter, and we have to support our shows. We have to support our creators. And other than that, I think we have to. I don't know that we have to take it to a level where we are boycotting and that, but we have to make our voices heard in some way. It's not. I think people underestimate that the power in just communicating through social media, through email, through mail, to whether it be to creators, whether it be to networks, whether it be to like, expressing your opinion of what you want. Like there's a reason why restaurants and hotels have these cards that you fill out that say, how can we improve? How do you like this? How do you like that? Your opinion actually matters, and we need to demand that there are more people in positions of power to greenlight these shows. Like Denise was saying, I went out and pitched Atlanta Monster to a bunch of networks, and I was all except for one time I was the only Black person in the room talking about a story that impacted a predominantly Black city, all Black victims, a Black man in jail as a potential serial killer. I mean, everything was Black about that story, and I was pitching it to no other Black people except one executive, and it wasn't like the decision-making executive. And there's also this notion that like our stories can only be told one time. I've seen there's been 20, 30 John Benet Ramsey projects. You tell me that a network can tell me that, oh, there's already been a project on the Atlanta child murders. No, that's not good enough. So we have to just demand that we get the same opportunities as everyone else, and we have to support each other when we're out there making content. And that goes from the very beginning to whether it be a podcast, whether it be a radio show or TV show, we have to support. Just the same way we have to give to these organizations. We can't expect other people to say yes to a show that we aren't watching, right? Or that we wouldn't watch, or you say yes to support an organization like Black Lives Matter if we aren't supporting them, both either in person at protests or donating money, whatever that form of support is. So we got to do it first and lead by example.
Indeed, indeed. The next question is from David. This is actually talking about the current pandemic that we're living in and how you manage that. David asks, how have you pivoted during COVID? Has it affected your collaborating and creativity?
Interesting. Yeah, I'll speak from my end. Obviously production has kind of ceased. It's just now trying to find a way to come back. But for the last 3 months, you haven't been able to physically create new content outside of the comforts of Zooms in our homes and self-recording. So within that, our pivot has been to development and really kind of looking an eye towards our slate and saying, some projects may not fit this new world that we're about to step into, but more importantly, do we have enough things that we're working on that we feel like will reflect the audience's needs and wants when coming out of this? Because right now what's interesting is like I think people are consuming content more than ever because they have all this time to do so. However, new content is by and large falling behind and being created to be able to match up to those demands. And so how do you meet that in the middle And from, you know, an executive point of view, what are the unique models that could exist coming out of COVID that kind of can do away with the traditional ways we used to create content, and what does that look like now? And to that end, I think what Tenderfoot has done so well is that, you know, they've planted themselves in a space to be leaders in, within the podcast realm. And I think you're going to start to see a lot more content be created out of places like podcasts and digital media and things that feel like are quite honestly a little bit more low hanging fruit to be able to develop and turn around content around a lot faster to, you know, further amplify different stories that don't necessarily have to be a big TV show, a big documentary, a big film, because right now we're living in an age where we may not be able to be in a place where we could go back to putting those bigger projects together, you know, without redesigning the way our workflow looks like until at least maybe a year from now, maybe even more. And so in the meantime, how do you continue to create content that is finding its audience, but then importantly, creating a new way of that? And, you know, what I love about, quite honestly, our industry and our world is that it is forever evolving. I mean, I think of what digital looked like 10 years ago when there was a bunch of these MCNs who now no longer exist. It's like, you know, we are pivoting and evolving. And I think this pandemic and COVID is only going to make our industry completely do a 180 and really look at how are we telling stories, and also what are the new ways to tell stories. So that's been my pivot.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I think Latoya is a great example. I mean, this was completely produced, you know, during the pandemic, and luckily, you know, we just had just a great team all around that was pretty flexible, and we, you know, we had it. It was the director was at home doing everything via Skype. We had we took a lot of precautions in the studios for the actors that were comfortable going in the studio. There was never more than 2 actors in at a time. We had separate rooms. We synced up between Atlanta and LA studios, so it sounded like people were in the same room. You know, they weren't. A few of them recorded off site. We did some iPhone recordings when, you know, we didn't need the premium studio quality. So, you know, we made it work. I think that's another benefit of podcasting during, you know, making content during a pandemic. So, I mean, the crews can be so small, you know, and which is very hard to accomplish on a TV set, right? And it's so time consuming to get the shot right. You know, there's lighting, there's makeup, there's so many people involved in getting it right. I mean, you can just come to the studio looking however you want to do a podcast, and no one knows the difference. So I think it's opened up a lot of avenues where we're figuring out how to proceed. We're also looking at our shows. Like, we make a lot of audio documentaries. We do a lot of knocking on doors and, you know, putting microphones in people's faces and getting the story right. And you can't just, you know, Zoom someone and get you break the case, right? It's not going to happen that way. So we're also looking at like different ways to tell stories that aren't so reliant on being in the field producing. So it's made us rethink some stuff, but I think, like I said, looking for Latoya was a good example of kind of ways that we're trying to move forward and still tell important stories that may not require us to be right there in the field. So yeah, it's been a learning experience for everyone, but I think this medium is prepared for it, and you know, equipped to still make content just as compelling, whether we're in a pandemic or not.
Absolutely. And this definitely is a learning experience. That leads us to our next question from Eric Johnson. Eric asks, can you give us a glimpse of what 16-year-old Denise and Donald did that led you here?
Ooh. Okay, Eric.
Okay.
Let me think about my archives. Well, mine is a very quick and easy answer because, you know, I had a very unique start, which led me to where I am today, is that actually discovered video production in high school. So when the time I was 16 was actually around the time I was discovering this medium by way of my high school's daily video announcements. You know, I had a teacher who saw something in me and saw that I was creative and kind of just let me experiment with this video camera. And somehow by my senior year in high school, I was directing, editing, producing our daily video announcements that got broadcast to the rest of the school. And so I did a lot of this in a vacuum. I grew up in Las Vegas, Nevada. I knew no one in the entertainment industry, but I also realized that this was a path forward. And that led me to think about film school, which obviously led me on the career that I'm in now. But, 16-year-old Denise was just now discovering this new medium for me, because this is in the mid 2000s. So at the time, things were becoming so much more accessible. Online was becoming so much more of a tool. And I just saw something that I was passionate about and wanted to learn more about, which also led me to realize, like, I have no idea how I'm going to do this, but I think this is what I want to do. So 16-year-old Denise decided that she was going to be into the film industry somehow, some way, and she made it happen. So.
All
Nice.
right.
So for me, 16 years old, I think business is what led me here, right? I think I've always been an entrepreneur, and whether that was washing cars, mowing lawns. At 16, I hadn't started my first official company yet. I think it was like 18. But my dad, I didn't have to look any further than my own home to see like what an entrepreneur did and like how freeing that was. And so my dad, as a contractor, had his own construction company. So I used to see business cards, just Albright construction, and that all those were just seeds. He never really even had to sit me down and say, "You need to start your business one day." It was just like learned behavior. I saw him working extremely hard, working for himself, and I was like, "Okay, I'm a hustler. I can, do this odd job and start this little business." And then, I was also being mentored at the time by an organization called Project Giving Back, which was Black police officers in San Jose who were spending their free time mentoring kids like me who weren't the D students who were, on the verge of dropping out, and you weren't the A students. We were the kids who they were trying to make sure didn't fall through the cracks and become the unreachable, right? So, I was spending a lot of time just learning from so many different positive people, whether that be, coaches in sports, my dad, my mom, and then, these other mentors. So I think all that just set me up mentally to think about business in a different way. One of the things about that organization that was mentoring me is that they actually had started a nonprofit business of t-shirt printing. So we were actually working printing t-shirts at 16 years old, which is why I then at 18 years old started my own, t-shirt design company. It was Calvin Klein knockoff, but it was my attempt at starting my first business.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think all of that stuff just shaped me to always think about any transaction as a business. So when I started doing street team work for LaFace Records, it was costing me money. I was losing money in gas money and parking, and that was a business to me. Whether you're making money or losing money, I said, okay, we're now starting a business to share in the loss or share in the win. And then when I got into that evolved from promotions to marketing to A&R management and ended up in podcasting. So it just shaped my mentality of how to look at the business of whatever it was that was transactional, and yeah, just landed me some here. I would have never told you at 16 that I would be, first podcast didn't exist obviously, but I couldn't have told you that I'd be doing anything even remotely close to music or any of that. I just thought I would go to college for business management and maybe start some kind of company someday or be in construction like my dad. I really didn't have a clue, but kind of just took advantage of the things that were in front of me.
I see. Well, let's see if we can get one more question in here, actually, from Paula Vanderveld. Paula asks, how can we avoid tokenizing Black voices during this time?
Ooh.
Mm.
Ooh, ooh, ooh.
That's a good one.
Yeah, it is. I mean, I think the first thought that came to my mind is, what the definition of tokenism is, right? And usually it means it's singling someone out and isolating them to be a representative for an entire culture, entire group of people. And so with that in mind, I think it's really easy to avoid tokenism because it shouldn't be just one, right? And so if you're trying to support and amplify Black voices, Black creators, anything Black, you should really look to diversify what that support looks like and know that it's not enough sometimes to just put one person in that position. It's not enough sometimes to just hire one Black person and say, we're diverse now, or, I'm going to support this one Black organization and now I'm woke. It's more than that. And so to avoid tokenism means you really need to look at the vast landscape of, depending on, and I don't know the context of your question in terms of Black voices, but it's like, there needs to be more means and ways of support for anything Black, no matter what industry it looks like. And so, if you're interested in supporting Black storytellers, then, make sure that you're reaching out and finding ways to work with the multitude of organizations who are already doing the work, or create your own, and amplify creators who you feel like will be able to expand and diversify themselves. And so, to avoid the tokenism, I would say it's more than just one individual, one person, one voice. It really is about doubling down and saying, I'm going to be an ally and I'm going to support them across the board, no matter what that looks like. So that's my response. I don't know, Donna, if you have anything to add.
Yeah, I mean, I think that the beauty of this movement is also one of the criticisms, and I don't think it's a criticism. They say, who's the leader? Who do we talk to? It's like, what leader? Like, Black people are a people. We don't follow one leader. There's not one train of thought. There's not one thing that we all, will solve all of our problems that one person can be the voice of. So I think it's great that there are so many different people, so many different voices. And as long as the media, we can't allow the media to spin it that way. And when they start to say, well, look at the looting and look at this, if there was a leader who could tell them to stop, they would just stop. First of all, that's never been true. So don't believe that. And, we want there to be a voice over here that feels this way and a voice here. And because we're not fighting. We have different approaches to how we all get justice or get equality. So I think it's fine to have many voices that we can lean on, because we shouldn't all say, man, what do I feel about this? Well, this is what the leader said I feel about it, therefore that's how I feel. Listen to 5 people, 10 people, support several organizations, see what they're all about, find your own voice, and don't allow the media to spin it that there is no leader. And also make sure that they are having a diverse panel. And I don't mean diverse in terms of race, I mean diverse in terms of Black opinion, and make sure that those are all represented. And I think that's extremely important. And I think we do that on our own all the time. This is what we do in our families, right? Like, my nephew feels this way, my sister this way, my mom, my dad. We understand this, but the media has often looked at it as Black people feel this one way. And when one Black person says something, especially something that they don't like, that becomes the opinion of what Black Lives Matter stands for, right? And it's just not true. So I think we have to just make sure we don't allow that to happen by supporting voices. And for us, I mean, I'm always reaching out to friends in the industry that have podcasts and about collaboration, about amplifying several voices that are currently not heard at all, but people who may have one podcast, and I'm saying, hey, let's do another one and get your voice out there, and another one from over here. And these are all different voices with different perspectives, all searching for the same goal, which is equality, justice across the board, from social justice to equality in these boardrooms. And there's still a ton of work to do, and podcasting doesn't get a pass. When I said that in Hollywood there wasn't a lot of Black executives in the room, that's the same in podcasting as well. I'm closing deals week in, week out, and I'm often the only Black person in the room. And I've had these conversations with companies that I'm partnered with, and I'm looking forward to announcing soon some initiatives that we have that aren't just what Tenderfoot is doing, but with the pressure that we're putting on our partners in the industry, and how they can step up and how they can help us to amplify these voices, create new shows, and not just shows that are central to like what's going on right now, but we need to like normalize being Black, right? Like Denise said earlier, you should be able to be Black and just talk about anything, not just issues that speak to Black people. So there can be we need to find mainstream shows that just have Black people as the voice or as the talent. And, so there's a lot that we're chipping away at. And I think, we just looking forward to additional collaborations with Denise and Issa and really all the Black creatives that we love that are doing great things and amplifying voices already. So that would be my long answer.
Absolutely.
Well said, Donald.
Thank you so much.
No, thank you, Taji. I was gonna say the only thing that Donald inspired me to add is just like, at the end of the day, it's like, we're not a homogenous community. We're not all, having the same issues, the same and all share the same sentiments sometimes. And so as it relates to the dangers of tokenism, you know, if you amplify one voice, you're putting that pressure on someone to have to be the one voice to speak for all things Black, and that's not fair to them, and that's not fair to our community. And so that's what we mean by, you know, furthering the support across the board and making sure that you're stepping up in more ways than one, because, you know, tokenism, it can be a very, very dangerous thing, because, you know, it puts the pressure on our people to have to feel like they need to represent everybody, and that's just not true. So you know, it's a great question, and I love everything that Donald said and what he's doing. So
Yes, it's absolutely amazing. So everyone, please go to lookingforlatoya.com. And I actually want to give opportunity for Donald and Denise to let us know where you can find them, where you can follow them.
yeah, I am on Twitter and Instagram at Miss Denise, MSDENIESE. And, you know, again, thank you for tuning in, and thank you for having me today.
Yeah, I'm on Instagram and Twitter at dalbright03, and you can check out Tenderfoot at tenderfoot.tv.
Oh yeah, and colorcreative.tv.
Yes, Color Creative, and definitely always go to theroot.com. Thanks everybody. This was a great conversation, and hopefully we can make some change.
Yes, indeed. Thank you, Tanja. Thank you, Donald.
Thank you.
Yeah. Thanks everybody for tuning in.
Thanks for tuning in.